Ladies and gentlemen, today I'd like to show you the W6N9500C QPL by W6 WERTARBEIT. The C in the name is for computer. What you see here is a computerized sewing machine. Q is for quilting, P for patchwork and L for long arm. This is a very large machine. You see, down here we have a 50 centimeter scale. The machine still exceeds this. It's even longer than half a meter. Naturally, these measures ensure a very large working area. You'll need that when you intend to do quilting and patchworking projects. Look here, the passage between the needle and the upright arm is 30.5 centimeters. And if you measure this way, the passage height is 12.5 centimeters. That's really a lot, and so of course we needed optimal illumination for the working space. We've used 6 LED HQ lights. 3 of them are located in the arm of the machine and 3 above the needle. This means that the needle area is optimally illuminated. Speaking about the needle area, this is the first W6 machine with a 9 mm stitch width. We haven't had anything like this before. What we've had before is our horizontal bobbin case. It's running smoothly and quietly. This machine also has a threader. You can see that here. This is our needle threader that makes threading really easy and comfortable. You don't even need your glasses. At the side of the machine head is the adjusting knob for the presser foot pressure. The higher you set the number, the higher the foot contact pressure on your fabric, and the lower you set the number, the lower the contact pressure. What do you need that for? For example, with jersey fabrics, you may end up with puckering and wonky seams as you are sewing. To avoid this, reduce the foot pressure, and this will counteract distortion and puckering of the fabric. This is a computerized sewing machine, as I said at the beginning. This is the Start-Stop button. You can operate this machine with the Start-Stop button. The benefit of this is that you can sit upright in front of the machine and don't slouch. Of course, the foot pedal is included, so you can use that if you prefer. If you connect the foot pedal, please only use that. When using the Start-Stop button, you also need to know how fast you want to sew. For that, we have included the speed control with the turtle and rabbit symbols. The further you push the slider towards the turtle, the slower the machine runs. The further you push it towards the rabbit, the faster the machine runs. We also have a separate turtle button. You can use this button when you approach a corner or the end of the seam. Press it and the machine will run slowly, so you can stop at the right point. This is the Backstitch button, so when I press it, the machine does a regular backstitch to secure the threads and fix the seams. This is the Needle Stop Up-Down button. You definitely need this needle button before threading. Before every threading process, press this button, because the machine will then automatically adjust itself so that the thread hook and the needle are in the correct position for the threading aid. We've also equipped this machine with an electronic thread cutter. We are aware that you probably have a good pair of scissors at home, but when you use the thread cutter, both ends of the thread are neatly kept under the fabric. And of course, the machine is also equipped with an automatic thread tensioning unit. There's a dial here that you can turn. You can use it to manually decrease or increase the tension, for example, if you want to do shirring. But basically you can do 95% of all sewing with the automatic position. This being a computerized sewing machine, it naturally is equipped with an LCD touchscreen. It is 12.5 centimeters high, 7 centimeters wide, has a clearly structured layout and is easy to use. What does it show? Up here you see 001, that's the program set, and here you see the symbol for it. This is a straight stitch. You see the symbol here, of course, but how do you know what's behind these numbers? The numbers are set down here. Now, if I set 006, for example, the symbol changes. Let's open this lid. Up here we've included a stitch pattern overview, and there you can see what stitches the machine can do and what it is capable of. It comes with more than 500 stitching programs. That means we have 200 programs here, plus the lettering stitches. The lettering stitches consist of normal print, uppercase letters, lowercase letters, numbers and special characters. We then have the same options in cursive and again in double-stitch lettering. So now back to our touchscreen. We've seen that we can select the programs via these numbers and they are then displayed. Next to the symbol, the touchscreen also indicates the current stitch length and stitch width. You can change that. The programmed options are always initially displayed. If you want to change the stitch length, for example, tap the button so it starts flashing and adjust the value with the arrow buttons, 3 mm, 3.5, 4.5, etc. When you press the button again, the chosen value is set and the button stops flashing. Now the machine would sew with a stitch length of 4.5 mm. Let's do the same for the width. If you don't want width 7 but 9 mm for instance, adjust the value with the arrow button, tap the width button again, done. This button down here will later be required for programming. It comes in especially handy when programming lettering stitches, as you don't want to enter each letter individually. With this button you can configure the settings for the thread cutter. With this button you can choose the needle stop position. Standard is needle up. If you tap the button and this frame appears, the needle stop position is always down. When you press this button, the machine does spot stitching at the beginning and end of the seam. I showed you the backstitching button before. Now, when you activate this button in the display, the machine will do spot stitching instead of backstitching. Careful, as soon as you tap the button, the machine will start spot stitching. Now, this button is quite interesting. You see the number buttons down here. So, with the help of the stitch overview on the lid, you can set the programs. All the stitch patterns that you'll frequently need have already been pre-programmed. These include straight stitch, zigzag, blind stitch, triple zigzag, triple stitch, overlock, and of course buttonhole. So tapping the middle button changes the number buttons to quick select buttons. If you ever sew hearts or other motif stitches later, you'll notice the machine only sews one heart. So after entering your desired stitch program, you need to press this button. You see, as soon as the button is framed, it is activated. The machine will sew the pattern in a loop. The same applies for the lettering stitches. I'm sure you've noticed that I work with a stylus for tapping the buttons. It's included with the machine and perfectly suited for operating the LCD touchscreen. You have a rubber back end for tapping the buttons on the display. With this stylus you can precisely hit the buttons and at the same time prevent finger marks on the screen. What else can you do with it? If you twist it, a ball pen tip comes out at the front end. But please do me a favor, do not press on the display with the ball pen end. As another special feature, we have equipped this model with a knee lever. Normally you have to raise and lower the presser foot with the foot lifter back here. But now, with the included knee lever, you have both hands free. Use the knee lever as your third hand to raise and lower the presser foot. So you can use both hands to accurately position the fabric, then lower the foot with the lever and start sewing. Supplied with this machine is an operating manual with detailed instructions and many illustrations. The illustrations are colored. The manual is extensive and very detailed. If you take a look at the back, you'll see that it's over 200 pages with loads of information and how to optimally operate the machine. Of course, this model is a free arm sewing machine as well. This is a very large model particularly intended for quilting and patchworking. But obviously you don't just need it for that. You also want to be able to sew other projects. You can push this extension table to the left and then you get a very large free arm where you can also pull over a trouser leg or sleeve. And this table has large storage compartments at the front and back where your accessories and other bits and bobs can go in. See, it can even hold an entire cable. It's really roomy. Now let's put that aside for a moment. Optionally, if you have really large quilts, you can also purchase an acrylic extension table from us. You see, here is the free arm. The free arm exactly matches the recess in the table and that provides quite a large sewing area for strain relief. So if you're planning on doing some really big projects, this is ideal. So now let's reassemble our machine. I want to show you that even on the normal work surface you have enough space to put a really nice big quilt underneath. Look, even if you want to sew over here or if you make a quilt, you really have ample space here. You can put your hands on both sides to comfortably guide your quilt through the machine, no problem at all. With other machines you would have to start folding, pushing, shoving and pulling. In case you're working on a wooden table at home and this wooden table is standing on a solid flooring, you'll notice that the machine produces a loud running noise. That's just normal operating noise and will occur with any sewing machine. For that, I'd recommend that you use a W6 insulation mat. Well, one, with this model you'd have to use two because it's too long for just one mat. So you can purchase a set of two. We sell them at a special price in our shop. The switch for feed dark lowering is located on the back of the free arm of the machine. You'll need this if you want to do free motion quilting or if you want to sew on buttons. Just slide the switch to the right and now look up here and the feed dog will sink below the throat plate. As I said, sewing on buttons, free motion quilting, you can do all that now. If you switch it back again, you have to bear something in mind. Our customers often get distressed and tell us that their machine is broken because the feed dog did not come up again straight away. But that's not a big deal. You just have to turn the hand wheel towards yourself about 5 times. You see the teeth of the feed dog have come up and you can continue sewing normally. Naturally, a cover is also included with your machine, this dust cover in black. The seam ripper with brush is supplied as an accessory. You also get 2 screwdrivers, a large one for stitch plates and the like, and a smaller one for the thread tension. This short round screwdriver is also included. It's ideally suited for the throat plate because it perfectly fits in the space between machine head and throat plate. The accessories also include needles and bobbins. Now let's take a look at the feet. The sewing feet include 2 buttonhole feet. We have 2 different ways of sewing the buttonholes. One is fully automatic, where the machine senses how big the button is and sews the buttonhole fully automatically, and the other is by using a stitch counter that you can program individually. Also included is a 1/4 inch foot, a free motion quilting foot, an open applique foot, a button sewing foot, a blind stitch foot, a zipper foot, an overlock foot, and a straight stitch foot for sewing jeans, for example. Another interesting thing is the second spool pin for twin needles, for example, and there you can put this stopper wheel on. If you find that thread comes off your spool, just put this wheel on and it prevents the thread from falling off. Also included is a felt disc, a small spool stopper, and this is the quilting guide so that you can always sew at the same spacing. Next we want to load the bobbin with thread. We have included a diagram in the cover so that you don't have to look it up in the operating manual every time. Here's how it works. Place the thread spool onto the spool pin here. Then the thread is guided through this thread guide and deflected. At the back here, you snap the thread into this hook and wind it around the tensioner. If you use the 1000 meter rolls from W6 WERTARBEIT, please wind the thread around twice. This is a very high quality yarn, which is also very thin and generates little fluff. Accordingly, it provides little resistance in the tensioner. Put the bobbin on the spindle after guiding the thread through the bobbin from the inside to the outside. Cut off the thread, shift the bobbin to the right and start winding. Now let's do that. The spool goes onto the spool pin. Place the spool stopper. All the way in, please. It must look like this. There must be no gap between the spool stopper and the top of the spool. If you leave a gap, there's a risk of the thread wrapping around the pin and then it all gets stuck. Pull the thread, as I said, in here. This is the first thread guide, in here and back to the right. Now this little hook. Snap in the thread there and wind it around the tensioner twice. Let's take a look. I hope you can see it. Once around, that's fine. And around again. So now we've wound the thread around the tension twice and next is the bobbin. The W6 WERTARBEIT bobbins have a little hole. Let's take a look. There's the hole and there you must pull the thread through. Let's see. A bit tricky without my glasses, but it turned out fine. Now the bobbin goes onto the spindle. Shift the bobbin and spindle to the right. Now you'll see this little symbol in the display. See the little bobbin here? This means the machine is ready for winding. You want to loosely hold the thread loosely up here. You can either press the start-stop button or use the foot pedal. I like to sew with the start-stop button. Press it once. The machine starts winding. Stop briefly after the first 5 or 6 turns. Take a pair of scissors and cut off the thread above the hole in the bobbin. Then you can continue winding as much thread as you want. Before we start threading the upper thread, let me remind you of 3 important things. First, the spool stopper must lie flat against the spool. There must be no gap. Now for the next thing, let me tilt the machine so you can see better. Before you start threading, the presser foot must be raised and you have to press the needle function button once. In this way, the needle and the thread hook are in the correct position for threading. So here's the third thing. You need to unreel about 40 centimeters of thread. That's the length you need for threading. With your right hand, I hold the thread. With your left hand, pick up the loose end and guide it into the first thread guide. We're in. The second thread guide is here. I'm going to hold the thread here so you can see what I'm doing. Around here. This is the pretension. Then down here. I'll change hands so you can see better. There's no need for you to do that at home. I just want you to be able to follow the steps. Down along to number 2, at the bottom around 3 and back up. Next is the thread hook. Guide the thread along the hook on the right, then over to the left. And there's another thing, because this machine is capable of sewing very fast, the hook has a little thread stopper up here. Firmly pull the thread through. Pull it completely in. When you've done it correctly, you need to see the thread running through right at the front of the thread hook. If that's not the case and the thread is still somewhere back here, you pulled it through too loosely and the machine will stop and block shortly after you start to sew. Keep your thread taut. And now we are at the bottom, just above the needle. Down here there are two more hooks, a larger one and a small guide hook right in front of the needle. Now take down the threader, grab it with your left hand and push it down. The threader pushes a hook through the needle from back to front. Now guide your thread from the bottom up. You see, that's how the threader holds it. And now I'm letting both of them go. On the back of the needle there's a little loop. Grab that and pull the thread through the needle. Threading is completed. The upper thread is threaded. Now you have to thread the bobbin thread. To do this, you need to open the bobbin case cover. Pull the black opening mechanism to the right. Then the cover is released, and if you press push at the corner here, you see, then the bobbin cover comes up a little bit and you can easily take it off. Now, this is the bobbin. If you place the thread like this, it forms a letter C for correct. If you pull the thread a little, the bobbin turns counterclockwise. This is how you can check that the bobbin is the right way round. Down here is the bobbin case. That's where the bobbin has to go in. And now the most important thing, there is a groove here. You have to pull the thread into this groove at about 7 o'clock, then pull it to the left and further up to about 9 o'clock. When you've done that right, you'll hear a little snapping sound. That is when the thread engages in the thread tensioner. Let's do that now. The bobbin goes in, and now I hold the bobbin down with one finger and grab the thread with the other hand, pull it into the groove at 7 o'clock and continue pulling up to 9 o'clock. Now when you pulled the thread taut here and held down the bobbin, the thread has properly gone into the thread tension. Please don't lay in the thread too loosely. I'll let everything go now. When you pull the thread a little, you'll feel some resistance. This is the tension test. It pulls a little harder. Here's another thing. Insert the thread behind this white elliptic plate and guide it around and down. Now, because the thread is tensioned properly, you can pull it over to the right and the little cutter down here will cut it to length. Close the cover and now threading is completed. To change the presser foot, you have to press the black lever here on the back. Then the presser foot is released. See, this is the presser foot. It has a bar in the middle and this bar has to be pushed into the recess in the shank. Let me demonstrate that. Place the foot precisely under the shank. Now you just have to lower the shank. Reposition as needed, and as soon as the shank hits the bar on the presser foot, you'll hear a snapping noise. This is a snap-on foot. Now let's do some sewing. We'll start with parallel top stitching. You'll certainly have wondered how RTW clothing always comes with beautifully straight top stitching. There's a simple solution. Let's set program 002. 002 is a regular straight stitch with the needle position on the left. The regular straight stitch is 2.5, and to make sure we produce perfectly straight seams, we use the blind stitch foot for this. We can use this white part of the foot as a guide. We place it under here, like this. So we start sewing, a little bit forward, then we backstitch, and then we sew the entire seam. Always line up the fabric with the guide. Press the Start-Stop button at the end of the seam. Now at this end, I don't want to do backstitching, but spot stitching. This is the symbol for spot stitching. Tap it and the machine will sew on the spot. Now we have one straight seam completed. So what else do we have to do now? We need to cut the threads. Press this button for that. The machine cuts the threads automatically. Both thread ends are under the fabric. No problem at all. Raise the foot. Now we have to do the second seam. We want two perfectly parallel and straight top stitching seams. For that we use the stitch width function. Since we've set straight stitch, there's no stitch width. Now, when you adjust the width to 5.0, say, the needle moves to the right by this offset. When you tap the button again, it stops flashing. Your setting is confirmed. Restart the machine. Don't forget to backstitch and have the machine run nicely along the guide. Stop at the end, and I use the spot stitching again. I'll press the button. The machine will do about 4 to 5 stitches on the spot and then stops. Press the cutter and done. So now let me show you what this looks like. See how perfectly straight the stitching is thanks to the blind stitch foot and the needle offset. With this option, you don't have to reposition your fabric. I have now set the program 004. This is the oblique straight stitch. It's particularly suitable for sewing stretchy materials. If you sew those fabrics with a regular straight stitch, you always have the problem that the seam is not stretchy. So when you pull the fabric and thus stretch it out, the seam will break. Here we go. Let's see. Press the Start-Stop button and the machine will start. Now maybe at the beginning you find that the fabric is stretched by the presser foot. In that case, lower the foot pressure a bit and, look, the fabric is fed through really nicely and straight. When you get to the end, press the Start-Stop button again, then the thread cutter, and that's done. You see, this is how it's supposed to look. You can pull the fabrics, so you can put the clothes on, pull them over your head or whatever, nothing will happen. It is stretchy and has enough give, a perfect seam. Now I'd like to show you the stable crotch seam. That's program number 005. This is a triple-stitched straight stitch. That is, the machine does 3 stitches back and forth in one spot. The seam is so sturdy, it's more likely to tear the fabric than the stitching. Just put it under the foot. We've set the program 005. Let's go. Again, when you come to the end, stop the machine, cut the threads. Now you hear the machine rattle and move a little. Please don't raise the foot until this is really over. Now the foot goes up and let's take a look. So you have a really nice sturdy seam, and if you tried pulling this apart, you'd see how firm and stable it is. Program 006, which I have already set, is the regular zigzag stitch. In the past it was used for finishing raw edges, but that is not done anymore. Today we can either use it to check the thread tension or to sew narrow rolled hems in particularly thin fabric. I've reduced the stitch length to 0.4 and the stitch width to 3. Place the fabric under the foot so that the needle comes down right next to the edge. You must take care that you have both threads up on your working surface. Hold both threads tight and start the machine. Let's go. Make sure you guide thin fabrics properly, otherwise they'll wiggle under the presser foot and your seams will be uneven. At the end, cut the threads, raise the foot and admire your beautiful rolled hem. Looks neat on both sides. The regular standard buttonhole is program number 007. When you enter 007, the buttonhole symbol will appear. I set the stitch length to 0.4. Here you see 0.0. You can adjust the width. This is preset because we also have 12 buttonhole programs in total. So if you need another width, select another program. A symbol flashes here. The machine wants me to pull down the probe lever. That is here, next to the needle. I've already attached the buttonhole foot. Initially I said the machine comes with 2 buttonhole feet. Here I use the one with the 2 stops. We have a stop here at the front and a stop at the back. And with this foot you can put a button in the back here. Now for the machine to measure how big this button really is, this probe lever must be pulled down. Come here, all the way down. As soon as it is all the way down, the symbol in the LCD touchscreen will stop flashing. I've prepared something special here. I'm using a filler thread. This gives you a sturdy buttonhole with a nice 3D look. Now all I have to do is to start the machine via the Start-Stop button and it will sew the buttonhole fully automatically. When it's done, it will automatically stop and secure the threads. So this buttonhole is finished. Press the thread cutter and that's it. Now just take out your fabric. Lift the presser foot. Now pull the filler thread fully through and cut off the loose ends. Take a look. This is a lovely buttonhole with a 3D stitching. I've now set program number 019. We've just seen that with program 007 we inserted a button into the buttonhole rail and then the machine sewed the buttonhole matching in size. Now if you have buttons that are too big for the rail, for example, you can use the automatic buttonhole program 019. With 019 you have to program the stitch length and the overall buttonhole length. With buttonholes it's important to always use some interfacing to stabilize your fabric. This also applies to the other buttonhole. The stitching will also look better. So I've entered 019. With this program the machine also tells you to pull down the probe. In this case we have to operate it manually. Now let's start the machine. The machine runs backwards and remembers the number of stitches it's done. Make it a nice big buttonhole. Now, when the machine has almost reached the end of the first row of stitches, you have to manually push the probe lever to the front. The reason is that the machine needs an impulse as to when the button size is reached, and with this program you do that manually. And done. Cut the threads, take out the fabric. Look, this is a manually controlled buttonhole, and it's huge. Program 021 is for sewing on buttons. If you select program 021, stitch width 5 will be preset. For the button I have here, I need 4. You have to try the width out and adjust it accordingly. Now let me show you how it's done. Lower the feed dog, install the button sewing foot, and place the fabric together with the button underneath the foot. Let's see if I can get this centered here. Now don't press the start button right away. You have to try out the stitch width first. Go slowly and turn the hand wheel. See, on the left the needle hits the hole and on the right as well. And now I have the machine do about 4 or 5 stitches. See? Perfect. But remember one thing, when you're finished, press the spot stitching button. This is to make sure that the threads are secured, otherwise the button will fall off. Also with buttons, it's best not to use the automatic thread cutter. Just press the needle function button to move the needle up, then simply take out the fabric with the button. Pull a little further so you have longer thread tails left and cut off. What you have to do now is also described in the operating instructions. Pull the upper thread to the wrong side and make a knot. Program 022, the triple zigzag, can also be used for sharing. That means we can sew in a stretched elastic band, and when we then let it go, it curls up really nicely. I've set a stitch length of 2 for this. Here we go. Tauten the elastic and keep it in the right position on the fabric. So cut the threads and let's take a look at it. You see, it can be pulled quite nicely. Great for shirring or elastic waistbands. And this is the right side. Take a look. Neat, isn't it? Program 025 is our first overlock stitch. For this overlock stitch we also use the Overlock Foot, which has a longitudinal bar in the middle. The bar reduces the upper thread tension to prevent the fabric from rolling in. Let's try that. The foot is installed, so off we go. I think you can see it better that way. The machine sews on the left side and moves the needle over to the right every few stitches. Now there you can really see how the upper thread tension is reduced on the bar, so there's no pulling and the stitching is flat. It looks great, doesn't it? We stop here, cut the threads, take out the fabric. Look, ladies and gentlemen, what a great stitch, sewn and overlocked in one step, and the stitching is stretchy too. Program 044 is the Vario Overlock Stitch. This is sewn with the normal standard zigzag foot and is distinguished by the fact that the machine does an additional stitch to the right. That means the needle doesn't only do 1 stitch to the right, but 2. This makes sure that the fabric does not roll in. Let's try that. See, it sews forward on the left and does 2 stitches to the right. Stop, cut the threads, take out the fabric, and we see this is the Vario Overlock seam. You see here, the needle pierced through the fabric and did 2 stitches to the right, so the fabric is kept flat. Program 31 is an open work seam. This means that you can line up 2 fabrics and sew them together. I've extended the program to stitch width 9. Let me demonstrate this. 2 pieces of fabric are aligned under the foot directly in the middle, and then you start sewing. Guide the fabric at the beginning. After a few stitches, the machine does that automatically. Due to the thread tension, the 2 fabrics are pulled closely together, but not on top of each other. We stop here, cut the threads, and you see? 2 fabrics neatly sewn together. It looks great, doesn't it? Program 28 is the blind stitch. This is for invisible hemming. Imagine this is your garment. The right side, the wrong side. Now fold up your hem like this. The machine will sew on the flat side and stitch over to the folded side. When you fold the right side back out, you will barely see any stitching. Now let me show you how it's done. Let's fold this first. Place it under the foot. Reduce the speed a little, go nice and slow. The machine will repeatedly stitch into this fold. It sews on the right and moves over to the left every few stitches. Alright, cut the threads, raise the foot. Now, what's the result? You can't see anything on the right side. On the inside of the garment, you'll see the hemming, and when you fold the hem open, you see these are the basting stitches. This is what it should look like. Next, I'll sew program 140. It is one of the satin stitches which are included in the 500 programs the machine provides. Place your fabric under the foot. Start the machine. When you've reached the end, just stop and press the cutter button. Next, I want to sew the same pattern again. This machine gives you the option of mirroring patterns. Let's take a look at the touchscreen. At a first glance, you can't really see where to set the mirroring option. It's very simple. Press this button once and you'll see the mirroring symbol at the bottom of the screen. Press it. You see, the symbol has turned. And here is the symbol for mirroring displayed. Then you can continue. Just a quick side note, please always remember to use some interfacing under your fabric. I'm using the W6 embroidery stabilizer. That is available as water-soluble, regular decorative stabilizer or with an adhesive side. Please never try sewing decorative stitches on plain fabric, it won't work. When you've reached the end, stop, cut the threads. I want to show you another satin stitch, that's program number 142. Now, as you continue, remember to deactivate the mirroring function. Press the button. The mirroring symbol is off. Access the number buttons, 142. Now let's sew this pattern. At the end, as always, press the Start-Stop button, cut the threads. Now let's take a look at our work. Here you see the mirrored pattern. This is the regular pattern. Both are two excellent satin stitches. Now, if you look closely, you find that they are really wide. These are 9mm stitches. Program 58 is one of the nostalgic and antique stitch patterns. I used embroidery stabilizer again, this time the adhesive one. Just put it under the foot. The program has been selected. It's a 9mm stitch. Stop at the end, cut off. You can also mirror this stitch. Position your fabric and do the settings. For mirroring, press the 1, 2, 3 button and the mirror button. The symbol is displayed. In the preview, you see the mirrored pattern. Let's go. Stop and cut. Don't forget raising the foot. And I would also like to show you another pattern, program 049. As before, deactivate the mirroring option, press the 1, 2, 3 button and select 049. This is the program. You see, the width setting is at 7mm. I tap this. Here you have the option to increase up to 9mm. Tap it again and it's set. Start the machine. Stop the machine, cut the threads. Take your fabric out and trim any loose threads. Now you see one mirrored pattern and one regular. Now let's do program 114. This is a regular decorative stitch. Alright, cut the threads. Program 095 is the next decorative stitch with a stitch width of 9mm. Here we go. Alright, cut the threads. Let's take a look. Done. There it is. Now you can trim the loose thread tails a little. Then it looks a bit neater. I like it. 9mm decorative stitches. Next we use the regular straight stitch 001 with the needle at the center. I lowered the feed dog and installed the free motion quilting foot. This is a quilting machine after all. Place your fabric, lower the foot and start the machine. Now you can do proper free motion quilting. Now let's see. I'll take that out and show you the result. I'll trim the threads and you can see the stitch pattern. Depending on how fast you guide your quilt, the stitch pattern on the back shows that the thread tension is absolutely okay. Next, let's do some lettering stitches. The machine has lettering stitches programmed. The 3 different versions are provided up here. As I initially said, we have regular print letters, cursive letters and the double stitched letters. Now let me see, the program numbers are provided above the respective characters. Now I want to enter an A, uppercase A. This is number 401 up here. So the very first thing I do is to save the set stitches, because I don't want to sew letter by letter, but the entire word in one go. So I enter 401. The machine displays the A. This is the first saved letter. Now I need an N, lowercase n. Let me see. I'll probably have to browse for this one. Nah, it's still in this group. You can't see this properly, but that'll be 454. 454 is the second, an N. If I press this button, the machine sets the same letter again, as there's two N's in Anna. Now, last I need a lowercase a, that is number 441. Now I've saved the lowercase a. Of course, you can combine lettering with decorative stitches. So I put a little heart behind the name. That's 157, and I'm done. Remember, use embroidery stabilizer under the fabric, and now I can go ahead and do the lettering stitches. Start the machine. It will automatically stop when it's finished. Cut the threads, and that's it. Now let's do the same in the single stitch print lettering. I'll shift my fabric. Now I first have to delete the previous letters. Press the C button for that. The 0 here indicates that no stitches are set. Now first we need the uppercase A, as we want to stitch Anna again. Uppercase A is number 201. 201, the uppercase A. N is 254, an N. Another N for Anna, just set it again, and then 241 is the lowercase a, and finally 157 for the little heart. And we can start again right away. That's all you need to do. The machine stops. Cut the threads. Now let's just trim the threads a little here and here. You can see Anna written with two different lettering stitches, and I'd say programming that was fairly straightforward. So I've now selected program 001 again with the needle at the center, set the stitch length to 3.5, and you can see we have two spools of thread up here. So here we have a second spool of thread with a second spool pin mounted on the bobbin winder. The spool pin comes with this disc. Place that under the spool. This is very important so that the spool rotates smoothly and also stands securely. I threaded both threads together, one into the right needle, one into the left needle. The needle I'm using is a twin needle size 75 in a stretch version. And with that, we can now do a really nice twin seam. Also, in case that the fabric starts stretching or puckering, remember the interfacing. And one more thing, reduce the stitching speed and the thread tension a little. If you've done all that, you can start. At the end of the seam, you can use the automatic thread cutter, that's not a problem. Raise the foot and let's take a look. See, on the right side you have the two parallel straight stitches, and on the wrong side you have a perfectly even zigzag. Now let's do a really neat jeans seam. I'm using both spools of thread again. Let me show you. I've threaded both threads simultaneously, just as for the twin needle. But this time I threaded both threads through one needle eye. The needle I'm using is a size 90, so both threads go through easily. And the finished seam will look just like an original RTW jeans seam. I set program 001 and stitch length 5. Now I'll start slowly, reduce the speed a bit. We work our way up to this bulky bit here, and there we stop for the time being. See? Brilliant! Stop at the edge, leave the needle in the fabric, lift the foot. Now I use the presser foot balancer. This can be purchased as an option. It will help you save time and lots of needles. And now you see, the foot at the same level as the bulky seam to be sewn, and then you can easily move over there without any problems, without the machine somehow causing trouble, breaking a needle or something like that. As you can see, it's going fantastically. Now let me show you one other thing. We'll stop here and cut the threads. Take a look. The stitching really turned out quite nicely. It looks just like the industrial seam. So one thing you need to do, please increase the thread tension by 1 step for projects like this, so that the seam turns out really nice and tight. If you have very thick woolen fabric that you want to top stitch, you can do it using the same method we just did for jeans. It's very simple. Just sew along with the settings I just showed you and you'll get a perfectly top-stitched seam. For sewing in zippers, just select stitch 001. Regular straight stitch with the needle at the center, stitch length about 2.5. Install the zipper foot. You see, the zipper runs through here. Down here, the zipper is guided in a notch of the zipper foot. Put the fabric against it, and here we go. You see, that works out just fine here then. If you want to be sure that your fabric doesn't shift, baste it onto the zipper beforehand. That's really trouble-free then. When you're done, cut the threads and let's take a look. See, the stitching is really close to the edge. The guiding notch of the foot is fantastic. Let me put it this way, trying to save money is not a bad thing at all. But we are also aware that there are poor quality products on the market, especially when it comes to threads, needles or bobbins. Poor quality thread will tend to break and shed lint. It will spoil your thread tension and may even damage the tensioners. Supposedly standardized needles that do not have the same length can't be standardized, and your machine will not sew properly. Also, bobbins that are not original W6 will not work either. Only the original bobbin really fits the W6 WERTARBEIT case. Some bobbins are too narrow, some are too wide. It's really actually not worth it. Therefore, we always recommend buy original parts from us. They are excellent quality at reasonable prices. Ladies and gentlemen, let me give you a little advice. Subscribe to our W6 WERTARBEIT newsletter. If you subscribe, you'll be constantly kept up to date and, most importantly, can also benefit from our weekly discount promotions. Thank you.